Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I am from Fairfax. You know, we have a great technology community in Northern Virginia, and the Silicon Valley claims to be the tech center, but we think of Northern Virginia as the tech center of the country. And just to prove it, I was out there a few years ago, and I met with Dr. Burt Richter, who is the dean of the Stanford University Laboratories. He is a Nobel Prize winner. And he was bragging about it. Well, you know, our unemployment rate is lower in Fairfax. Our education levels are higher in Fairfax. Our net income is higher in Fairfax. But he was going and bragging. But he told me the story of one of his colleagues at Stanford who won the Nobel Prize and found immediately upon winning the Nobel Prize he could make more money going out giving speeches and lectures than he could teaching and writing. And he went on the road and he could get $5, $10, $15, sometimes $25,000 if he's speaking at the University of Richmond for one speech. The money starts pouring into this guy. He'd been in the academy all his life. There were only so many liberal causes he could give it away to. So, you know, he figured, you know what I'm going to do? He said, I'm going to get one of these fancy high-tech limousines. So he bought the fancy high-tech limousine. It had the global positioning system. Everything was digital, had a wet bar, you know, everything you need to travel in style. And he hired a full-time chauffeur that would drive him from place to place. And he'd go give his speech, collect his fee, go on to the next town. Sometimes he could give 3 speeches in a day. Money's pouring, but one day they're between towns. And the chauffeur turns around and he said, Professor, this isn't fair. He said, what do you mean? He said, you make more money sometimes in one day than I make in an entire year. And yet I have to drive you through traffic jams, rain, snow, sleet, icy roads. I've never gotten you there a minute late. And the professor said, well, he said, if you think it's so easy, hotshot, he said, well, I'll tell you. He said, I've had to listen to every one of your speeches. And he said, in fact, he said, I've heard your speech so many times, he says, I can give it better than you can. Well, this kind of upset the professor. He said, all right, hotshot, I'm going to tell you something. You think it's easy. In this next town, he said, they don't have the slightest idea what I look like. All they've got is my curricula vitae. Let's trade uniforms. I'll drive you in, you give the speech. If you pull it off, I'll give you the fee. He said, you're on. So the Nobel laureate puts on the uniform. It's a little tight, but he puts it on, drives him into town. They're greeted as they come up to the main auditorium. The chauffeur is ushered into the green room, makes some small talks, goes out on the stage, and it's this huge audience of people who paid top dollar to hear this Nobel Prize winner talk about his treatises and how he won the prize. Well, he proceeds to the lectern, and he proceeds to give the speech. And he gives it perfectly, flawlessly, except for one thing. Since he has memorized the speech, his cadence is a little faster than the professor's. And he finishes up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. He gets a thunderous ovation. The master of ceremonies comes out, gives him his check, looks at his watch. He said, ladies and gentlemen, this is entirely unexpected, but he said, I see we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. First question. Professor, he said, I noticed in one of your earlier treatises you discussed the effects of photosynthesis and sunspots and their effects on avic migration in southern New Zealand. He said, now, recent scientific periodicals completely debunk this theory. And I wonder if you could explain to us in some detail this dichotomy. Well, the chauffeur looks at him. He said, you know, you ought to be embarrassed asking such a dumb, stupid question like that. He said, that question is so easy. He said, it's so elementary, I'm going to let my chauffeur in the back of the room answer it. So, let me thank Mark Warner for really putting this together. Mark's got the answers. Now, I managed the first campaign against Mark. We would fight during campaign times, but when it came time to govern, we always came together. We worked very closely on a number of issues for the state. Balancing the budget, transportation issues. And we knew when elections were over, it's time to start acting like adults. The voters had made their choice. The difficulty today is that doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen not because there aren't some very good people. Mark can tell you there's some great people in the Senate. But they are constrained in their actions by things I call micro trends, or macro trends, actually. The parties today, let me just go through them quickly so we understand what we're dealing with and how you can make a difference. You can supply the atmospherics, you can supply the support for members to make the tough decisions, to come together and compromise. Number one, the parties today, the political parties are what we political scientists say are ideologically sorted, so that the most liberal Republican in the Senate is now more conservative than the most conservative Democrat in the Senate. The most conservative Democrat in the Senate, by the way, is Ben Nelson, is retiring. It's the same in the House. There are actually 2 Democrats that are more conservative than about 5 Republicans, Ross and Boren, they're retiring. And in the next set of 10 next most moderate Democrats, 3 of them have been defeated in primaries this year, and several others are retiring. It's getting worse at that level in terms of the ideological sorting of the parties. We used to run with the name of the back of our jersey. Now voters are voting for the color of your jersey. And this is, I would say, complemented or reinforced by several other factors. Number one, in the House in particular, where I was a committee chairman, I'd been campaign chairman for the Republicans, most of these districts now are drawn, and it's certainly true in the legislature, predetermined which party is going to control that district. So the voters in November are kind of out of it. The race for most of these members is their primary election. What does that tell you? What do primary voters want? You ever heard anybody running in a primary saying, I'm going to compromise, we're going to bring together? Those incentives are not there. Members are terrified of their primary electorates. And by the way, independents have fled both parties in droves. The fastest growing registration group in the country are independents, not Republicans or Democrats. They're losing market share. So the reinforcement mechanism of these members who are looking, if they want to get reelected, having to go through a primary, less than a quarter of the seats in the House of Representatives are now drawn where they can be competitive in November. So the control of the House is fought over a sliver of seats. Most of these districts are predetermined, and the primary elections determine it. It's reinforced also by the media models today. Anybody ever watch Fox and MSNBC in the same night? Get a life. I mean, this is... You need a translator. You need a translator. We used to at least argue from the same set of facts. And the internet, what comes over the internet, I call it the crap to content ratio that comes through the internet today. People believe Barack Obama was born in Kenya because they saw his birth certificate come over on the internet. I started to believe it myself till I saw his birth certificate from Indonesia come over. Then I started to wonder. But this stuff, people get their information that way. It makes it harder for public officials to act if the facts aren't even laid out correctly. And then finally, let me just get to, and this is probably the worst, campaign finance laws, which were intended to get special interest money out of politics. All McCain-Feingold did, and for the record, I voted against it, and Mark wasn't around, so we can both, I think, talk about this in a critical way, but the idea of that was to get money away from parties. It eliminated what's called soft money to political parties. The myth was that this money would disappear. This money didn't disappear, did it? It's come back out from the political parties, which have been a centering force in America for 200 years. It went out to the wings, and it goes into primaries. And so members are now worried about some super PAC and attacking them, and they're afraid of alienating these interest groups because they can come in with more money than the parties can, or that they can raise, because the parties and the candidates are constrained in how they can raise money in federal elections. So these are macro trends that have moved politics apart and made it harder to just come to some resolution of the difficult issues, whether it's immigration, whether it's energy policy, whether it's our national debt. Mark has been fighting the battle in the Senate, getting the Gang of Six together, getting members together, trying to build that critical mass. But he can tell you that as some of these members go back and they get beaten up in their party conventions in their state and by the partisans, it's very, very difficult. And that's where you make the difference. You are current and rising leaders in this Commonwealth, being able to talk to each other, being able to identify with each other, being able to understand, get in each other's heads so we can come to some solutions. These are serious problems. Virginia is number one today in being able to attract business and so many other things because we have had a series of leaders in this state that have been able to straddle that and move beyond it. But it's getting tougher. It's not getting easier. And the only way the political leaders can do this is through people like you. So today, I think as we dialogue, as we talk about the issues that face the Commonwealth, as we start to understand where people are coming from, this is an important step, not just in your own personal networking, but in our able to come together to build a greater Commonwealth of Virginia. So thank you very much for coming today. You're the future of this Commonwealth, and the rest of us can't really act unless you're out there supporting us and doing your job and articulating these things and networking and working together. Thank you very much.
When Senator Warner visited some months ago and suggested the possibility of today's summit, I could tell right off the bat it was a good idea, even though it took quite a bit of shaping and reconsideration to make sure it could be all that it is. It turns out we thought you would be maybe 250 people. You are more than that. And that's one reason that you're getting a chance to network physically. You're really close to each other. And so obviously Senator Warner was onto something important. There's a hunger for the kind of conversations that we're preparing to have today. And Senator Warner has been doing things like that throughout his career. He's been building bridges the whole time that he's been in public life. He's recognized nationally among his colleagues in the Senate and the House and throughout the Commonwealth as somebody who is striving for bipartisan leadership. Right now, he is part of a group that includes 45 senators and 100 members of the House in developing a plan for cutting our national debt. He was chosen by his colleagues to lead a bipartisan task force charged with evaluating the effectiveness of federal agencies and programs. He's been an invaluable friend to our men and women serving in the military, from helping improve their housing opportunities and conditions to expanding their health services. We're educating veterans right now at the university. We have a great ROTC program here that's a hub for all the ROTC schools in the region. And seeing the benefits that they can bring to us with the benefits that the Veterans Program is a great gift. Virginia was the beneficiary of Senator Warner's leadership as governor from 2002 through 2006. Then he focused our attention on improving education, expanding economic opportunity, recruited 135,000 new jobs to Virginia. His work continues to point toward the future, and today's summit will serve to amplify the local conversations and connections as we continue to shape the future of Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mark Warner.